And we're back and we're ready to get the 3 scarves ready for the final step before wet finishing, which is twisting the fringe. And I realized when I looked back at the last video that everything was off camera when I was showing you how to snip out the header yarn. So I'm going to do that again right now. I am going to actually do this near the middle of the weaving, and I am just very carefully, first I'm separating apart the ends, because what I don't want is to accidentally cut a warp end that I want to preserve. Okay, so now that my yarn is laid bare, I am just, and this is why the snips, as opposed to great big honking scissors, are so useful for weaving. I'm just snipping, 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 and being really careful not to cut my weft yarn. And in fact, you can see how the weft, sorry, the warp is sliding right off this scrap yarn, which is great. And it allows me a little more play to very carefully snip that end. And now I'm just going to be able to pull out this scrap yarn. And what's buckling here is that one of my warp ends, I've accidentally grabbed that, and I've, whoops, see, I just did it again. But it comes right back out. You just need to stretch everything back out. While I'm working on these header yarns, and in fact, I'm going to go grab a T-pin because this will be a lot easier with the T-pin. Okay, there we go. My fingers are just too bulbous to get into these fine yarns. And what I actually used for my scrap yarn on this header is, and I don't know why, but for some reason I had a bobbin partially filled, just, little tiny bits left of I think it was hand spun rayon. And like I said, I don't know what I was thinking that I put this on, but this is actually how I empty out my bobbins or my perns when I'm starting a project. If there's just a little tiny bit of yarn left on the bobbin or pern, I try to use it up in headers. So again, because I'm right-handed, this is difficult to see, but all I'm doing is taking the T-pin and just lifting up or separating out the yarn I want to pull on at any given time. And once things are snipped, even on the selvages, it just comes out really easily, one pair at a time. Okay, so what else have I got going on this table on which I'm going to get my scarves ready for wet finishing? And keep in mind, I'm almost certainly not going to finish this process today for reasons that are going to become obvious in a few minutes, because each end of 3 scarves with 364 warp ends, I've got to twist the fringe. And you do this before wet finishing because, especially if you're adding any kind of agitation and it's any kind of yarn that its nature is to will fundamentally change in water, like a wool-based yarn or even a silk-based yarn, uh, you want the fringe to be twisted before the scarf hits the water. So that's not the case here. Bamboo is not going to change much, but it is still worthwhile to go ahead and do that. And in fact, before I start twisting the fringe, you see all these little kinks from the knots that were left? I am going to spritz this end of the scarf with some water and see if that can help get out some of these kinks. And if that doesn't help, I will actually pull out my steam iron and just let it steam for a bit, or my garment steamer, although that's so much work to use, it's sometimes not worth it. Because what I want is 6 inches of fairly straight yarn before I start measuring to trim off these ends, because this is much too long. This is way too long to use the fringe twister on. I will be really unhappy. Ask me how I know this. I've done this before. So what I'm going to do is cut this down to 6 inches, 5 or 6 inches, twist my fringe, and then do the next scarf. And again, I just want to do this because it's so much fun. I'm going to pull out and lay flat all three of my scarves next to each other, because now that they're lying flat and not, flopping all over my loom, it's actually a little bit easier to see how the treadling changes and the weft color changes change the scarf. So these are my three patterns. And remember that I did this middle one just like I did the first one, except for with minor variations. And this actually was not what the design called for. What the design called for was two of these 10-inch sections next to each other and then a band of three. But it's all okay. And when I do another set of these scarves, which is not going to be my next project, but it'll be a project soon, I can play with the treadling even more. I can do whatever I want. Treadling changes are one of the funnest things about weaving, because you get to play and it's a blast. Okay, so now you get a real sense of not just how the pattern changes when you change the treadling from 10-inch section of pattern. I'm going to just call this pattern A. I don't really know, and I don't feel like looking it up. Let's say this is pattern A and this is pattern B, and two blocks of 10 repeats in between each pattern change. This one is 10 inches A, 10 inches B, and three between. Sorry, no. This is A, all the way down in the 10-inch sections, and then a block of three just to mix it up a little bit and keep it real. And then this one, it changes from A to B every 10 repeats of the 4-row twill. So here they all are in their glory. And this feels like a lot of fabric, because it is. It's, 3 6-foot scarves, or very close to. So it's a lot of fabric. All right. So the other things I've got on my table here, and this is what inspired the name of this video, these are sewing supplies. I have got my rotary cutter. I have got a cutting mat with a grid on it. I have got my lip edge ruler that hooks on to the cutting mat. And I have got my tape measures and dress weights, or cutting weights, fabric weights, that I'm actually not even going to use as fabric weights. I'm just going to put this whole thing down on the scarf. So, as I said, one of the first things I ever learned was that if your ends that you're trying to fringe twist are too long, oh my gosh, it takes forever, because you're twisting, and you're trying to work with 8 inches when what you really need is 5. So I don't do it that way anymore. Okay, so the first thing I want to do, these ends are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inches, and I want ultimately a 5-inch fringe. So I am going to trim this down even further. And yes, I could have done this on the loom, but I did not. I'm going to trim this down even further before I start fringe twisting. Okay, so I have got my scarf lined up on it doesn't even matter which one, but one of the grid lines on my cutting mat. And I have got, okay, this didn't work as well as I thought it might. I've got my cheapo drugstore comb just to even everybody out. And again, this is one of those areas where you need to fuss to a certain extent, but the crazier you go with it, the more you get diminished returns. So I want this to be, and you can see that even though I had that cutting line of the beater bottom that I was following, this is not even. So I am going to count out, whoops, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is my new cutting line, and I'm carefully hooking. And in fact, if I really want to get nutsy with this, I can put the weight on top of it, and then I'm just going to trim. And I've got to do it from this side, sorry, because that's how I set things up. and I can't do it the other way. And I'm just using my rotary cutter to even off. So now I've got a nice even edge. But here's the trick to it, folks. When I start twisting these fringes, I'm going to run into a slight problem. Sorry, I saw the end from my hem stitching, and I just wanted to get it out of the way. When I start fringe twisting, everything gets a little less even just because of the nature of using the fringe twister. And so I want to figure out what's a reasonable solution so that I have an even fringe, but I haven't driven myself completely nutso crazy trying for perfection every single time. What I know from experience is that a finished twisted fringe of at least 2 inches, maybe up to 4 inches is ideal. And I'm probably going to end up somewhere in the middle. So I might actually scooch things up a little bit on this cutting mat, but we'll see. All right, so what is a twisted fringe, you ask? A twisted fringe is an alternative to just letting the fringe hang. So I hem stitched each end of each of these scarves, and the weft is protected. So I could just leave this fringe as is, but I'm not going to do that because fringe that is left blank, naked, if you will, does not wear well, and it really doesn't wash well. So twisted fringe is a great way to give yourself a fringed end edging in a way that adds some more protection to the fringe. Whether you're washing it or whether you're just wearing the scarf every day, you don't want this stuff to wear out. Also, it is a design feature because if I chose, and I'm probably not going to do this, but I might, if I chose, I could take half the fringe bundles of each of these 2 warp colors. The gold and the turmeric, and do a twisted fringe that's 2 colors. So all I've done is I've clipped the ends, half of the orange and half of the turmeric, and I'm going to now, and notice too how having this weight here gives me something to kind of pull against without losing the measurements that I want on my fringe. So right now I'm twisting clockwise to the right just until the ends are starting to kink up. Then I clip them together, and apparently I don't even need to do that. I could do it separately. And I go in the opposite direction. And now, look what I've got here. I have got a 2-color twisted fringe. Let me bring the camera in closer for this. So now this becomes a design feature. So I could choose, and I'm not sure yet what I'm going to do. I could choose to do 2-color fringe all the way across. In other words, start with a bundle that's just red and then do half, 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 half of each of the 2 colors all the way across and then end with another solid red. Or I could choose to keep each color of the warp ends pure. So I might split this bundle of maroon warp ends in half and just twist it on itself. Now that I'm looking at this, though, I'm kind of seeing that the 2-color thing might add a little something something to this overall design. It's possible. Oh, and I can do it different ways on each scarf. So on this scarf, which starts with, this scarf is the busiest one. This is the scarf that changes every 10 repeats. On this scarf, I might do solid color fringe just because there's so much going on in the rest of the fabric. But on the other scarves that start with 10-inch bands of the same colors over and over and over again, that's where I might mix it up. So once I have made those decisions, I'll be able to do the next thing.